Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network invite you to discover your mission. A brand new in-depth monthly video series featuring engaging Catholic speakers who will challenge you to live your life abundantly. For only $25 a month, you will receive a personal monthly mission, including 3 full-length inspirational talks that build upon a new theme each month. Sign up for the Discover Your Mission tier at patreon.com/patchworkheartministry today.
Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry present Journeys in Faith. Now, here's Anne DeSantis.
Hi, and welcome to Journeys in Faith here on this Friday evening on Fiat Ministry Network. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm very excited because we have an amazing guest with us. She's also been a guest on my podcast, the Sowing Hope podcast with Bill Snyder. Her name is Heidi Fishman. She is an author, a gifted author of the book called Tootie's Promise. So welcome, Heidi. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's good to talk to you again, because I have to admit, I have Tootie's Promise. I've been listening to it on Audible. I have to recommend that too. The Audible is amazing to listen to the book.
Oh, thank you.
We have so much to learn about you. I thought we could start out with your bio because it's so interesting, and it tells a little bit about yourself and also how you got involved in writing. So Heidi Fishman grew up in West Hartford, Connecticut. After graduating from Williams College, she received both an MA and an EDD in counseling psychology from Western Michigan University. As a psychologist at Dartmouth College, she specialized in working with people with eating disorders and histories of trauma. While Heidi always knew her mother and grandparents were Holocaust survivors, she didn't start researching their story until she finally retired. 5 years of investigation led to Tootie's Promise, 2017, MB Publishing, Bethesda, which, while fictional for the purpose of allowing conversations among characters, follows the Lichtenstein's true story from May 10th, 1940 in Amsterdam through 2 Nazi camps, liberation and resettlement. The book contains a significant number of original documents. Heidi Fishman won the Joseph Zola Memorial Holocaust Educator Award from Morris Greenberg Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Hartford. Tootie's Promise was designated by the National Council for Social Studies for the Children's Book Council at a notable trade book for young people and has won numerous other awards. Heidi speaks to schools, community groups in order to teach about the perils of prejudice and bigotry. She's made multiple visits to the USHMM in Washington, D.C. to sign copies of Tootie's Promise. Pre-COVID, she traveled to schools throughout the U.S. In this time of COVID, she presents to schools remotely. She lives in Vermont with her husband and an aging border terrier. While she isn't staying home due to COVID safety measures, she likes to travel and discover new places and meet new people. That's a beautiful bio, and I'm glad I read it.
It's a mouthful too. There's a lot of hard words there.
Yeah, but I think it's important, especially somebody like you, not only who has like a fantastic background in the educational field in psychology and in research, but then the fact that the idea of this book, Tootie's Promise. So why don't we start out with, for people who are just tuning in and thinking, I want to get that book. I already know I want it. So if you can tell them a little bit about the book to start out and where they can purchase it.
Okay, so the book is Tootie's Promise. It is a story of what my mother and her family went through during the Holocaust. And I really wrote it, gearing it towards middle grade students was my first and most important audience. But, ages 10 and up is fine. And adults are reading it. Actually, I was at a book club meeting last night where, a bunch of adults read it and enjoyed it. So it's educational on many levels, depending on, where you're tuning in from, so to speak. And it's nonfiction. It's mostly nonfiction, but I had to label it as fiction for marketing because I completely made up the dialogue. I mean, I knew my grandparents and I felt like I was kind of tuning into them, channeling them, so to speak. What would my grandfather say here? What would my grandmother have said there? But the dialogue's fiction. Who remembers? My mom doesn't remember every conversation. But the events in the book are all real. Everything that happened actually happened.
I have to say this, and I mean this to say to the viewers here, is that this is really one of my favorite new books that I've been reading and listening to it on Audible. Yeah, I love it. I really love it. And I can't recommend it enough. So please do go to Amazon. You want to look up Tootie's Promise, Tuttis Promise by Heidi Fishman. Her website is kheidifishman.com. You can learn more about her and about her writing. So
it's on Audible, it's on Amazon, you can get it on Kindle, but you can also go to your local bookstore and get it. It's available at the local bookstore, so don't be afraid to go that way or see if the library has it, although I don't mind selling books.
That's right. And the other thing is, if you are a parent or a grandparent or just someone who likes to give gifts to children for whatever reason, or if you're an educator, really, I think if you're an educator, it's really a perfect book. Because, children, younger people, well, all of us really, we all need to know about the families that were affected, those individuals. They were real people who were affected by the Holocaust. And some of them are survivors and they're still alive, right? We need to hear their stories.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that you brought this to life. You did a lot of work. I mean, we did the podcast on Sowing Hope. And, I learned a lot about it just from that 1 hour podcast that you did with Bill Snyder and I. And it's just highly recommended. And when you listen to it on Audible, you get the back and forth conversations too, and the different voices. And so I just think you did a great job.
Thank you. Yeah, the inspiration for the book was interesting because my daughter was in 7th grade and my mother was invited to come to her school to tell her Holocaust story because the kids were reading actually Night by Elie Wiesel, which is a fabulous book. But in my heart, I was not happy that the kids were reading Night because they're too young. 7th grade is too young for that book. That's a book for adults.
Okay.
It's very, very intense. And I felt like the kids would either gloss over the real seriousness of it, or they would be so traumatized by it that they would, you can't take it in anymore when it's that big and you're such a, you're young. So I was watching the kids listen to my mom. And for the first time in my life, I was listening to her story as somebody's parent instead of listening to the story as her daughter, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And I heard it very, very differently. This was no longer just about my mom. Now it was about how kids were what they were soaking in from her. But I was also thinking about my grandmother trying to be a mother going through this, taking care of her children and what that was like. And my grandfather trying to take care, protect his family. As an adult, when I heard the story, I was like, this is so different now. And so I wanted to capture all those voices. So the moms that read the book will think of, be tuned into my grandmother being a mom in that situation. And the dads who read the book will be thinking, yeah, how would I protect my family in this situation? And the kids who read it just learn about what the heck was going on back then and how terrible it was and how prejudice really goes from words to actions to crime so fast. Mm-hmm. And we have to stop that.
Yeah, we do. We do. And that's why I think I'm very grateful for you to be on this show. You know, the show's called Journeys in Faith, and it's on Fiat Ministry Network. And as people of faith, no matter what your religion, I mean, on this network, you know, it is pretty much a Catholic network. We need to be aware of these important virtues that need to be taught to all of us, children, all the way through our entire lives. It's just very, very imperative for all of us. And so I'm just so grateful for you and that you took the time to be on this show this evening. So can we backtrack a little bit and learn more about you? Because I'm sure that our audience would love to hear your own personal journey. And, you know, you said your mother was the Holocaust survivor, but you were born in the United States. And so if you could tell us about what was it like growing up with a mother who and parents who went through what they went through.
Well, my father didn't go through it. My father was born in Connecticut.
Okay.
Dad was in the United States. He was spared from that.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
But my mom was born in Germany, and then we'll skip the war years, came to the United States in the mid 50s. And she just wanted to be American. She wanted to be safe. When she got married and had kids, she wanted to be all American suburban mom, Doris Day kind of thing, and she really protected us. I know there are plenty of children of Holocaust survivors who talk about how their parents always talked about what happened and the stories and the trauma. Not my mom. She wanted us to have the most carefree, perfect childhood. She'd bend over backwards to make sure we were always happy. So, and there was always the potential there that we all became spoiled brats. I don't think I became a spoiled brat, but I could have. And it was always, try to provide the best for the kids. That was very, very important to her. So I feel like I had a charmed childhood.
She was protective.
Very
protective of you.
Very protective. And if I asked about what happened during the war, she would answer questions. She would tell me, but they were always very sort of matter of fact, no big deal. And then move on to, what should we make for dinner, or, some other topic. And she really made me feel like it wasn't important. Like it was just something she'd been through. Let it go. Let's live now. And that worked in stopping me from asking lots of questions. I wish I had asked more questions of my grandparents when they were alive, but they just made it not interesting. Very simple answers and move on. But then when I said, okay, Mom, tell me more as an adult, she was okay. She started telling me more because as an adult, I could handle it, that. And then she started telling the story at schools, and then I was starting to get more interested in it. So.
And would you say too, I would think, and your mother would know better than I would, that as the culture sort of changed and now people are hungering to know more about the past. Like I think back then, it almost sounded like it was a trauma that they wanted to kind of just like not think too much about. Right?
Yeah, I think, in the 50s and 60s, there were plenty of people who didn't ask the questions about what happened. The survivors didn't want to talk about it really. And I think people didn't ask questions because, they had their own trauma about it. The trauma of, in the United States, I'm sure there were people saying, why didn't we do more? There had a lot of people who had family that fought during World War II, and they had the trauma of the veterans coming back. That it's a different story, but also trauma. I mean, the whole world was traumatized at that time. So, it's hard to have those conversations. How do you have a conversation? And like my mom says, she had friends who 20 years into their friendship in the United States, and you never told me you were a Holocaust survivor. And she's like, well, what am I supposed to do at a dinner party? Say, oh, by the way, this food's much better than it was at Trasenstadt. I mean, how do you bring up, in the middle of a, dinner party, oh, by the way, I'm a Holocaust survivor. There's never a time to put it into the conversation.
Yeah, I would think especially like socially at something like that, like a dinner party where people like to tend to focus on positive things. They want to talk about sort of what's going on or how's the food this evening or how's your family doing. When you start to talk about really deep topics or painful tragedies,
Yeah.
not everybody's comfortable with that whole idea of human suffering, and I think that that's a great lesson for us, all of us as humans, as how important is it for all of us to reach out to those who are suffering, either during a trauma or after, right? I mean, afterwards too. And
Yeah.
sometimes those defense mechanisms come in when people are trying to protect themselves from depression, right? So maybe it could be partly why they don't want to discuss it too, was just that sadness that maybe can overcome.
Right. They don't want to bring it up, but at the same time, they don't want to, they don't want to put it on anybody else. They don't know that anybody else is really going to understand what they went through.
Mm.
And I think as humans, we don't do enough reaching out to people and saying,
Mm.
How you doing? We do that, but do we say, no, how are you?
Mm.
How's it going? Are you getting through this pandemic? Okay. Are you, I heard there was something at work for you. How are you doing with that? Do we really do that enough? I don't think so.
Well, I think that's one of the messages in this book that you give, without saying those exact words possibly, or maybe there is sometimes that you do instill that idea of the importance of the human relationships and being a caring individual to people, making outreach, right, to the people who feel marginalized, the people who've gone through really tragic and difficult times. And not everybody wants to touch that. So I think you did an amazing job.
Thanks. And that really is part of the story of the family. I don't think my mother's family would have survived if they weren't together. They all took care of each other. There were moments where the kids took care of the adults and the adults took care of the kids, and there had to be people, they had to have their angels that were not in the situation where they were, that reached out and helped them as well. But without other humans, people who were alone in the camps, had no family, so hard.
Mm.
So hard. Whereas for my mom, she was with her parents. She was with her brother. Part of the time she was with her grandparents. It makes a huge difference.
Oh, yeah, you can't even imagine in my mind. I can't wrap my mind around what that would feel like to be separated from your loved ones in that way and then be tortured. So we always need to lift up our prayers,
That's what happened to millions.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
The Germans had this way of really dehumanizing people, and taking everything that was important away from them.
And every human life is important.
Every life is important.
That's right. Every single life. So I'm just so grateful to you to being on the show. So what was it like for you then, maybe when you were in your earlier years before, in that transitional time, like from growing up with your mother and learning a little bit about it, and then maybe into adult life? So how was that for you?
I mean, as far as the Holocaust was concerned, I think I just ignored the whole thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I thought about it. Why did I want to be a psychologist? Why did I work with people with trauma? That's probably my own subconscious at work there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you chose those paths, right? And knowing what your family had been through, even though you didn't talk about it all that much, you did go in the direction. So let's talk about also your careers, aside from your writing and what you're doing right now. I know it's in your bio. If you could tell us a little bit more about your psychology background and education.
Okay. So, I went to Williams College, majored in psychology. Did I know what I wanted to do with it? Absolutely not. To all the college students out there, if you don't know what you want to do, that's okay. You'll figure it out.
That's good.
But then I decided I wanted to, be a therapist. So went to grad school, got the doctoral degree. And my first job out of grad school was at Dartmouth College, and I was working in the counseling center there, counseling students. And it was always, it's a different story every day, because students bring a lot to the table. You never know who's going to show up and what the issue is going to be. But I really did sort of gravitate towards the trauma. I was good with that. Really, just being there with people who'd been through something really hard, and the eating disorders as well. But, a lot of eating disorders come out of trauma.
Absolutely.
Having the trauma background, then the eating disorder becomes a way to cope with it, and it helps with the coping, but it's really not good for you. We all have our bad coping mechanisms.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so being able to pull those pieces apart and help people with it, I was good at that. And then fast forward a little bit, and I had 2 kids. I got divorced. I got remarried. 2 more kids came along with the new husband, and suddenly there was 4 middle school kids at the same time, and I'm like, I don't have time to go to my office. 1 sick kid, 1 snow day. In Vermont, we have a lot of snow days. Do I stay with the
Vermont?
Do I stay with the kids, or do I go to the office and take care of my clients? And I felt like I had to make that choice, which I didn't like that choice. So closed the practice, and within a year, I was bored, put that in quotes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to write a book.
Wow.
And there it is. And there's the book.
There it is. And you know what I like about it too, is that you have pictures in there too.
Yeah. I mean, I felt like it was really important for young readers, especially, but to relate that this is not just a person. This is this person. This person went through this.
Mm.
And what's amazing is we have the pictures. I found in my parents' house, my mom had this drawer full of photos, and it was like my mother in 1940, my mother in 1942, my mother in 1943 during the war. I'm like, Mom, how did this happen? One, how did you end up having a picture taken? Because they're all photography studio type pictures. It's not like my grandmother had a camera on her phone and pulled it out and took a picture of somebody. You go to a photography studio and you pose and you have your picture taken. And then how do these pictures survive the war? So that's actually becomes part of the story too.
Yeah, that's amazing, because pictures really bring it to life. And I think the fact that you said that you put a human face, a human name, and a family, right? This family, this one family story.
Right.
Now, of course, other families are involved and other people in the book, but this is their story. And so I think that's what makes it very special. And really and truly, it is a book that young people can read. I mean, that it won't be an uncomfortable book as far as, like you said, maybe too mature. I think it's just perfect for those younger readers.
Right. The real horrors of the Holocaust are not on the page. They are alluded to. They're off the page. The more mature reader can read into it and get there, but for the younger reader, they don't necessarily go there. That's where my psychology comes in.
Yeah, see how you used your degrees for this book.
Yeah,
your psychology and your education too, both. So
yeah, so there's enough there for the kids really get it. They little things that for maybe adults is not that big a deal, but when I tell kids that my mother was not allowed to go to the park anymore.
I remember that in the book.
And that was she loved going to the park, and now she can't go to the park anymore. Why? Because the Nazis said so. Well, that's not fair. You are right. That's not fair. But that's how the segregation started. That's, if we can, they started by putting some people in the other category. Those other people are not allowed to do this. And when the kids now, they're like, that's just not right. I'm like, yeah, that's right. That's not right. Good. So when you see stuff like that going on in your community in some way, you stop it.
That's right. And that's why this book is so important. And we're going to have to take a break in just a minute or two. But I would invite everyone, maybe during the commercial break, is to go to Amazon and look up Heidi Fishman, Tootie's Promise. As I said, not only is it going to be in a paperback version, and Kindle, but it's also on Audible, which I don't know about you, but I love Audible. And this
I
is
love
the book to
Audible.
listen to because it's very insightful, it's deep. And you know what? It's also the relationships that are being formed in this book that you're the real people. So I mean, it's just interesting and entertaining too, but in a very deep way.
I think it's a really good summer read for students and for parents to read along with them. I mean, the conversations over the dinner table when you've been reading this book, I think can be really intense and teach. There are a lot of teachable moments in this book. And for parents to be able to be right there reading with the kids and saying, well, what do you think about that? And how are we going to, what would you do? And it's important.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to backtrack. I said entertaining, but what I guess I meant to say in an educational way, to have that empathy, to be able to develop and learn about empathy in our human lives and how we can reach out to those who are in trauma and in the middle of a trauma and both afterwards. So, but thank you so much so far. So we're going to take that break here on Fiat Ministry Network. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Hi, my name is Anne DeSantis, and I'm the director for the St. Raymond Nonatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. You can learn about us on our website at nonatus.org. I'm here to tell you today about two great podcasts that I hope that you will tune in. The first Tuesday of every month at 8 o'clock, we have a podcast specifically for Catholics affected by divorce. From 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern, go to Philly Nonatus on YouTube to subscribe. In addition, we also have a podcast the last Thursday of every month. That's also at 8 o'clock Eastern Time for 1 hour. And that one is for families in crisis. We have some really great guests coming up soon, so hope to see you then. Please also consider the fact that you can make spiritual direction appointments with us with our spiritual moderator. All you need to do is go to our website on the contact form and just reach out to us. We'd be happy to hear from you and look forward to setting up an appointment. So we'd love to connect with you. Please share this video and let people know that we're there for families affected by divorce and also families in crisis. Thank you.
Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network present the Discover Your Mission series.
Now, I had been brought up without any prayer, without Bible, without church, nothing of that kind. And so when my father died, I became suicidally depressed. I had no desire to live. And yet, by the grace of God, whenever I got to the point of actually taking my life, I always had this interior conviction that if I took my life, I would simply find it again on the other side, and it would be permanent misery.
But it wasn't until I became a wife and a mother, and I began to try and pass my faith on to my children, that I realized that everything I knew about Jesus was memorized doctrine.
I was a good man, I was a good father, I was instilling the sacraments into my family. I was definitely not intentional. I was stuck roped to my faith.
But what kind of strength did he have? Jackie did not just have a strength of body or baseball skill. He had a strength inside of his spirit, a courageous meekness that empowered him to play the game.
And I tell him what is going on with me, and he's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, no, I think this is like some sort of miracle, dude. And he's like, okay, of course, but I'll believe it when I see it. Honey, you've been trying to quit, and you've been saying this and saying that, and I'm his big line to me is, you shouldn't say things, because I never follow through on them. And so this was week after week, month after month. He is looking at me like, this is a miracle. There is no way that you, on your own, could have done this.
So we are called to sing. All of us are called to sing. All of us are called to express ourselves and join our voice into the unity of the church. Often with my choirs, I ask them to listen to each other, to listen to the sound that they make together as one. That's what we're aiming for. Through the harmony or unison, we're aiming for a one sound.
You need to decide. What are you going to participate in? Are you going to participate in the historic Christian idea of the altar of sacrifice, which is in the Eucharist, or not?
This Friday evening with my amazing guests. I have Heidi Fishman. She is an author of the book called Tootie's Promise. And during the first half of the show, I read you her bio, but I want to read you a little bit about the book too, is that it was named a notable social studies trade book for young people, winner of 2 silver Benjamin Franklin Awards, plus a silver Nautilus Award winner. And also, as I said, to find out more about the book, Tootie's Promise, you can go to KHeidiFishman.com or just go to Amazon like I invited you to do before the commercial break. So welcome back, Heidi. Thanks for joining us.
Still glad to be here.
That's right. So during the first half, we talked about you, your journey, about what it was like for you to begin to develop writing this book, and about the whole idea of human suffering and developing that empathy and learning from this book, right? Learning about what happened during the Holocaust so that we can learn from it and become those better human beings toward others. Yeah. And I thought maybe for this half of the show, could you tell us about the process? Because I know that this was an amazing journey for you in writing this book. So how did it all begin? Like, how did the idea come? And then I know you did a lot of visiting places, you know, you actually went over to the sites themselves of where you found these different documents. And so tell us from the beginning.
Okay, so the beginning was, I think I've mentioned before that I was just inspired by my mom telling my daughter's class about what she went through and watching the kids react to her. So they're learning, they're getting it. I want to write it down. And now I had not been a writer before this. I was, in school, I was always drawn to numbers. I was a math kid, a science kid. I avoided any, even in college, if it has a term paper, I don't want that class. Don't make me write term papers. I wanted tests, if that makes sense. So I didn't feel like I really had the education background to write the book. And I just started signing up for any writing workshop I could find. I went to the local community college. I had a doctoral degree, but I went to the local community college and I'm going to take a writing class, and workshops around. I signed up for everything. You never stop learning.
I agree.
Keep signing up. And I did not know where to start. I thought, okay, I'll just take mom's stories. She's told the stories enough times. I'll just write down the stories. And it was interesting, except there's a lot of holes because she was young. So I had a story over here and then a story over here and a story over here. And I couldn't join them because her timeline in her head was all over the place. She didn't really have that full chronology of the order that things happened and everything. So I started doing research, and I really didn't even know where to research. I started randomly Googling things. So, I plugged my grandfather's name into Google. Did anything come up? Go to the U.S. Holocaust Museum website, and they have archives there that you can access online, and I Google things. And the first thing that really came to light was I found a document on the Yad Vashem archives. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And I was sort of going through their archives, lying on the couch at home. And I came across a document which was in German. There was a stamp in Hebrew on it. And my grandfather's name was right in the center of this letter. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I sent it to my mom. I said, Mom, translate this for me. And she did her best to translate. She still knows German, but it was like lawyer German, not everyday German. So big, hard words. And then it turned out it was from Adolf Eichmann's office. He was in charge of the final solution. And it was naming 7 Jews that needed to be taken out of the Netherlands and sent to the camps, even though another top Nazi had been saying, I want these Jews to stay free because they are metal traders and we need metal and they can help us find the metal for the armaments.
Wow.
So 2 top Nazis were arguing over what to do with 7 men, of which my grandfather was the first one named. And this was used as evidence in the trial against Eichmann in Jerusalem in 1960. So I'm like, wait, this is really real here.
Mm-hmm.
This became very, very real, very suddenly for me. And then I found more of these. There was all these letters back and forth, what to do with what they called the metal Jews. And each time it was my grandfather was the first one on the list. And then I was hooked on the like, I'm going to study history. I'm going to find it. What is the story? What was going on with metal during World War II? Why was my grandfather important? And so I had to, and that pulled a lot of the stories together of what my mother remembered, and it made sense once I got to the bottom of that story. And it was random. I just found it. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't know what I was looking for.
It's amazing how it started out with a Google search. And now that makes me think that it's a gift for all of us today that we can do things like that. Can you imagine if you would have tried to do this like 20 years ago or something?
If I tried,
how hard that would have been?
Yeah, 20 years ago, I couldn't have done it. Because I sometimes I say, I was looking for a needle in a haystack, but I didn't know what the needle looked like, and I didn't know which haystack to look in. If you're looking for a needle in a haystack and you don't know what you're looking for, and you can't do it by going to a library or archives if you don't know what you're looking for. You have to ask for something specific. But the computers have just opened that up for us. You throw in some keywords and see what comes into your lap.
Well, you did a thorough job. I mean, I have to say that you really did a thorough job. And so after that initial sort of like aha moment, I know that you flew over there. Tell us about some of those visits, because I remember when you did the podcast with Bill Snyder and I, there was that one moment where you were sitting in that, I believe it was like some kind of a restaurant or something, where it was the exact place that I believe where your grandparents were staying or something like that. If you could tell us about that.
I went, I felt like I really needed to go to the places where this happened. Mm-hmm. You can't, if you're sitting in Vermont with the birds chirping and the green trees, you can't capture, you can't capture the atmosphere in these camps or in these small apartments where people were scared. And what if we're rounded up? I had to go to the places. What did they feel like? How big were the rooms? That kind of thing. And the hardest visit, the absolute hardest visit, was when I went to Theresienstadt, now the town is called Terezin in the Czech Republic. Then it was Czechoslovakia. And that was the concentration camp where the family was for the last 9 months of the war. And it was the strangest feeling because the whole town was turned into a concentration camp.
Wow.
35,000 people died there of disease and starvation. They were not actively murdered. They were passively murdered, if that makes sense.
Unimaginable.
Just don't feed them enough. And we went there as tourists and as researchers, and I had a tour guide, and, and he was like, we really need to stop for lunch before you go into the museum. I'm like, okay, so let's stop for lunch. And then he found a little restaurant, and we're sitting there, and I realized I'm sitting in this restaurant, and this was actually a barracks during the war. There were prisoners in this building starving to death. And I am now sitting here having my lunch brought to me by a waitress. And I couldn't wrap my mind around it. it was wrong on so many levels. Yeah, during the whole process of writing the book, I was also writing a blog, which is on my website. If you go to the khheidifishman.com and you find my blog, my whole research project and the things I found, they're there. And that one, it was just, I really was speechless. It was like, when I finally wrote something, it was poetry. I don't write poetry, but that was the only way I could capture it that day. It was just,
because your feelings were so entwined with what was happening before your eyes that you just couldn't put it into factual words. It had to be sort of intertwined with your soul.
right.
And to me, that's probably why it came to poetry.
Yeah, it was the only way to express it. But it really was difficult. I went to all the places that Tootie was during the book. I was there. I went to every single place to really try to understand it.
What would you say? I mean, and I know that you took pictures and things like that on this trip. What was it like as you were there? Were there any other moments that were sort of like those, really like where the rubber meets the road, kind of like, wow, I'm here, or like just aha moments, I guess? Or was it all? Maybe all of it was. Maybe every place you visited.
A lot of it was. Another aha moment was one of the apartments that my mother's family lived in when they were in Amsterdam. The last one they lived in before they were taken away. And what I did was before I went to Europe, I wrote letters to the occupants. Dear occupant, I would like to see your apartment. My mother was a child. She lived here for these dates during World War II. I'd like to see what that place is like. Could I come? And every single person said yes.
Did they?
Every person invited me into their home.
Oh my goodness.
And there was
a blessing.
There was a young couple living there. And it becomes important. So she was white, he was black. It's an important part of the story. And so I'm telling, I'm in the room and I'm looking out the window and what was the view like and what was the architecture like. And then they asked me about what my mother went through there. And I was telling the story. And then I was so wrapped up in what I was doing, I was not paying attention to their story. And then this young man speaks up and he tells me that, I can't remember the number, 12 members of his family were killed during apartheid. And he was from South Africa. And all of a sudden I'm like, okay, there's, the trauma, okay, so here I am, I'm telling him about my family's trauma, but I didn't stop to ask him who he was. And he came from trauma. And I should have been listening more before I was talking.
That's a great lesson for all of us. And I'm grateful that we're talking about this, because as people of faith, and as I said, that with our show, it is a show about faith, right? So, I mean, it's a very important thing, I think, for us to talk about these things. And I think you said this during our podcast, is that empathy is such an important part of us and our human lives and our spirituality, right? We have to have that empathy. And I don't think, it's kind of understandable that we all do it sometimes. Like what you said, you didn't ask him about his own life or whatever.
Yeah.
And we do that. All of us do it sometimes. We forget to think about the other person because of our own circumstances and our own, we all have somewhat of an agenda every day of what we need to get done and what we're trying to accomplish.
I was like in his house. I was like, I was a guest in his house. And I was like,
that's right.
That was a faux pas.
That's right. But in the end, I'm sure that, the fact that you're telling me now, to me, it sounds like it all kind of like he finally shared and it all evened itself out. But thanks for bringing that up, because it is an important lesson for all of us. And I think that's a really important lesson in your book too. Now, there was something else you told me about, I thought was very interesting, that you are Jewish. And I know you told me that when you did the research that you found out some things about the faith of some of those relatives that were, around in that time. Tell us about that. That was
Well,
very interesting.
Well, it was actually before that time, but
Okay.
part of my research, I ended up doing some genealogy because who was the extended family and who was alive during the 1940s. But I ended up sort of going back further, and my mother always considered herself a German Jew. That's who she grew. That's who she was. That's who her parents were, German Jews. And I'm like, well, okay, but so my grandfather was born on the Polish border, right, Mom? Well, he wasn't Polish. He was German. I'm like, oh, okay. But was it that border changed a lot? I said, was it German when his mother was born, or was it Polish? And we started going back and going back and going back. And it turns out that in the book, Heinz, we meet Heinz. Heinz, my mother's father. He is the grandson of a man who was the head rabbi of some small town in Poland. And he was the son of the head rabbi of another small town in Poland, who was the son of another head rabbi of another town in Poland. And it goes back for 11 generations.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like it's like the family was completely religious, very religious. We're talking that I'm related to the person who wrote one of the most important Orthodox books about the Jewish laws and all the Jewish laws. There's many of them. And that's my relative who wrote that. And I'm the descendant of that person. And his name is Rabbi Joseph Caro. And it's religious. And then comes my great grandmother and my grandfather and my mother. No religion, like really not, we're Jewish because we were born to Jewish parents, but no religion. Okay. The spirituality, not there. So I didn't grow up even, basically Sunday school. Yeah. Unless there's really good snow, then we're going to go to Vermont and go skiing instead. So I didn't have much of a religious education.
But did you mention to me that your son, that he's very involved in his religion? He's practices it very much.
And comes my son, who decided a couple of years ago that his religion was very important to him. And he is full on Orthodox Jewish. When he comes home, I have to make sure my kitchen is kosher. I have to buy the right food. I can only use the frying pan that's tucked away for when he's home. I can't use the frying pan that gets used. Maybe my husband made bacon in it one day. No, can't use that one.
So it's an interesting thing. I'm sure, wasn't it for him too, when you found all these things out? I mean, you shared it with him. Was that a big revelation for him as well?
Oh, yeah. He had sort of become religious already. And he was part of he was asking, what else, Mom, let's look. And there it was.
Lo and behold.
And
there were so many facets to this book. I mean, so many things that you found out personally, and then to share it with other people. So thanks for sharing on that end too, because, here at Fiat Ministry Network, that's a topic that we talk about a lot, is religion, right? So we're grateful to you. Now, you mentioned something to the effect that you do talks. And right now you mentioned during the bio that you did them online, but now we're kind of coming out. I don't know in Vermont what things are like, but I know here in Pennsylvania that pretty quickly things are starting to lift. And so if somebody's watching and they would like to have you come and do something either online or in person, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mostly do talks for schools, especially I love it if the schools have, had them read the book and then they invite me to come speak. I've done everything from a classroom with 7 or 8 kids in it in northern Vermont, where the towns are very small, to a few years ago, I went to a school outside of Birmingham, Alabama, and I talked to 1,200 middle school kids at once. I'll do it. Just, in person, Zoom, Google Meets, whatever, I'll figure it out.
I
And
think for educators, it's so important,
it,
and for younger people, but really anybody. I mean, you could do it. You could do talks for, you know, adults.
last night I went to a book group.
Mm.
You know, the next town over in Vermont, they read the book and they invited me to, and it was my first foray out into the world after the pandemic. We actually all sat in one room without our masks on. I was like, wow, we're all vaccinated and we took our masks off, and it was liberating.
Yeah, so that's awesome. And then, so now you are traveling in the United States. So if somebody's watching and they are in a different state and would like to fly you out to talk to their school,
Yeah, I'm
or
not
school
quite
district.
sure I'm ready to get on an airplane this week, but
Okay.
you know, by the fall, I'm probably okay to get on an airplane. But yeah, I don't charge people for my time.
Mhm.
I'm not going to make money off of the suffering of what the Jews went through during the Holocaust. I refuse to try to make money off of that, but I do like my expenses to be paid. We'll put
Yeah.
it that way. You know, if I need to fly out or stay in a hotel, yes, please pay for that.
Well,
but
you're
my
spreading
time-
the message, really. It's not about making money, right? I mean, this is
not-
about you
it's
spreading
no,
this
it's
this
about
message.
it's about people getting along.
Mm,
I'm so
I agree.
tired. I'm so tired of people not being able to get along with each other.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's so important, and that's why this book it's coming at the right time. I mean, it's the perfect time when you think
Right.
about it.
It's you know, basically there's a rabbi, a very famous rabbi. His name is Heschel. No, I can't remember his name. Okay, anyway, Joshua Heschel, I think is his name.
Okay.
And he basically said the Holocaust didn't start with killing. It started with words.
Mm-hmm.
The Holocaust started with words. You know, they started with the propaganda and teaching kids to hate. And we have a lot of bad words in our society right now. You know, when I say bad words, I don't mean swear words. I mean words where people are spreading hate. You know,
It's important to bring it to light because
putting other people down because
Yeah.
they belong to this group or that group, or they're that color or that religion or nationality. And I'm just so tired of it. It's like, can't we stop this yet? Can't we stop?
I mean, it's not about, I don't think it's about always just about the power of positive thinking, because there's a lot more to it than just that. But I think the idea is you want to lift people up, right? You want to support them. You want to accept people as they are. So, and minister to them, right? And help them when they're suffering, when they're going through stuff.
Right.
And so when they're trauma, right? How many traumas have we had this past year? I mean, so that's what this book, the trauma of the Holocaust, as horrible as that was, and such a major international tragedy, we can learn from it going forward that we don't want to ever go back to a place like that.
But we keep going back.
Yeah.
The world keeps going back there.
We need to move forward in a better direction.
You know, the camp, I'm getting a little bit political here, but the camp that my mother was in, for the first camp she was in, called Westerbork, was on the Dutch-German border. It was built by the Dutch government. It was not built by the Nazis.
Wow.
Okay? There were German Jews fleeing Germany to Holland. Holland said, we can't take them all in. We're going to put a camp near our border, and we will keep them there. Now, does that sound familiar at all? You know, there's the refugee camp near the border. We don't want to really let them into our society. Then the Nazis found that camp and said, oh, all we need is some barbed wire, put it around the camp, and now they're all stuck there in prison. You know, it was like,
you learn so much when you
didn't let the refugees in. They didn't let the refugees continue out. The boats with refugees leaving Europe that came to the United States, and the United States said no. The United States said, no, we will not let you Jews who are being persecuted in Europe, who found a way out, land on our shores. And they sent them back. The journey
Wow.
to St. Louis.
Goodness.
It's a horrible story.
It
We
is.
sent people back, and we didn't accept all the refugees that made it out to our country. Why? Anti-Semitism.
It's so good that we accept that what happened back then was true, real, and it actually did happen, and never forget. So I think it's important that you're sharing all of what you're telling us, because there's a lot more to learn. I mean, quite frankly, there's so much more to learn about it. And so now, unfortunately, we're headed toward the end of the show, but you know, you're an honor, really. You're an honor for me to host on this show and on these podcasts. So I hope we can have you back again. And I just want to invite people to please do get that book, Tootie's Promise, Tuttis Promise. Go to Amazon or go to heidifishman.com. Heidi, did you have any other final words that you wanted to say before we end?
Well, I'm just saying, if anybody is reading the book, it's nice to also look at my website at the same time. I have little videos of my mom telling some of the stories on the website. I've got discussion questions. If you're homeschooling and you want to have discussion questions to go with the book for your kids, that's helpful. More pictures, more documents. There's a lot of information there.
You did an amazing, I really mean this. I mean, and I say it is one of my favorite books. I love listening to it on Audible. So please get it. You know, if you have Audible and you have the app, get Tootie's Promise. And also go back if you can and listen to the first podcast that we did on Sowing Hope on Patchwork Heart Ministry, because you shared a lot of things on that podcast that we might not have touched on this one. So I just invite people to do that. So Heidi, again, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And God bless everyone. We'll see you here next week on Journeys in Faith.
Journeys of Faith is a production of Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry. For more information about Journeys of Faith, email info@fiatministrynetwork.tv. And be sure to friend, follow, and like us on social media. Just search Journeys in Faith with Anne DeSantis.